Well, welcome back to Swordbox. As you can see, I've been eaten by the great white shark. And, you know, that's kind of how sexual addictions are. We're going to pick up where we left off yesterday. You know, people debate whether or not masturbation as a practice is associated with sin or with sexual addiction. But if we look at what Jesus said, you should be able to decide for yourself whether doing this is sinful or not. Matthew 5:27 and 28, Jesus said, "You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery." We all know what adultery is, sex outside of marriage. "But I say to you that everyone who looks on a woman to lust for her has committed adultery already in his heart." So in other words, what Jesus said, you do not have to have the actual act of sex outside of marriage to be guilty of the sin of adultery. And when we lust over a woman through pictures or movies or pornographic material or even in real life, we've already committed adultery in our hearts to God. And most masturbation is stimulated by lustful images and lustful fantasies, especially by boys and men. Boys and men have very high sex drives, and each time they fantasize with sexual images to fulfill their cravings, they become a little more attached to it and a little more addicted to it, just like the reference we read yesterday from the doctor. Proverbs 6:25 says, "Do not lust after her beauty in your heart." Do not lust, which means we have to decide to turn away. You can't stare at it and then not lust. You can't fantasize about it and not lust. Maybe you have to not watch that movie and not look at that magazine. We get to decide what we're going to feed, whether or not we're going to feed our lust or whether or not we're going to starve it. Lust is giving yourself over to it, not simply noticing a nice looking person. If we constantly look at nudity or sex or people in general with lust, then those are the things that will consume our thoughts and will consume our actions. Our brains can store all those images that we put in it and bring them up at any time. It's like a giant computer where we can again and again fantasize and lust over these thoughts and these desires and these pictures in our mind. If we don't put them in there, then we won't have to fight to keep them out of the forefront of our mind. We can't help but notice an attractive person. I mean, that's not sinful at all. But if we begin to stare and undress them with our eyes and lust for them, now we're in the area of sin. We either develop the habit of starving our lust to look away when we've seen them, knowing that if we look again, it's to lust, or we just continue to give into it. We may never meet that person or talk to that person. We're simply using them for our own desires and for our own pleasures. And many men and women are addicted to this kind of sexual addiction, looking at people like they're a piece of meat instead of a human being created in the image of God. But that's the very nature of lust, to take only what we desire to please ourselves. Over time, we become servants to our lustful appetites. Just as with substance addictions, sexual addictions can become the center of our lives and leave a trail of destroyed relationships behind. In Titus 3:3 it says, "Serving various lusts and pleasures." That word serving here means to be a slave to be in bondage. The deception is that we get pleasure at no cost. The reality is that we end up becoming a slave to our lust. The Bible says in Hebrews 11:25 that the pleasures of sin are passing, or they're temporary. But you know, the consequences of sin can last a lifetime. Proverbs 11:3 says, "But the perversity of the unfaithful will destroy them." Where can sexual addiction lead? Well, it can lead to fornication, adultery, rape, homosexuality, every single type of sexual perversion that we see in our culture today. You know, describing the young man and his sexual desires for a married woman, he's described as an ox that goes to the slaughter in Proverbs 7:22, or a fool who goes to the corrections of the stocks, because there is consequences. Verse 23 says, "He did not know it would cost his life." Do not let your heart turn aside to her ways, and do not stray into her paths. These are some good verses for young men to memorize. "For she has cast down many wounded, and all who were slain by her were strong men." Don't think you're stronger than the power of sexual addiction. "Her house is the way to hell, descending to the chambers of death." You know, that's a pretty good description of any sexual addiction or temptation to commit adultery or any sexual sin. The warning is here for us to accept and to keep us from harm. God never lies. He never lies to us. He is true, and he never ever speaks lie. But you know what? The devil never tells the truth. And so it's going to be up to us who we decide to believe in the area of our sexuality. And I'm hoping and believing that you're going to stay away from addictions and stay away from those big sharks that are only coming out there to devour and take away God's good intended sexuality for your life one day. God bless you. We will see you back here tomorrow on Swordbox. Watch out for sharks.